The first speaker kind of hails from this new era of the native AI stack, this new frontier, right? So as opposed to legacy products where you're just kind of infusing AI on top, right? There are these products that are basically born of the AI era that you just didn't see a year or two ago. Um, OpenAI is an example of that. But another big player is Windsurf. And Windsurf has been pioneering a coding IDE, AI-powered, and has basically been credited with kicking off this wave of vibe coding. And so it's my pleasure to welcome the founder and CEO of Windsurf, Varun Mohan. Welcome. Hey, Varun, come on. That's quick housekeeping. So the acquisition rumor exists. Varun can't comment, so let's shelve that and focus on what matters to our engineering leaders, architects, and product owners. So Varun, 3 years ago, you were virtualizing GPUs for autonomous vehicle startups. I was watching a podcast where you're kind of giving your history recently. Today, you're running a full stack coding agent with hundreds of thousands of daily users. What signal told you to bet the company on that? And how can enterprise lead engineers spot a similar pivot before competitors do?
I think so. A lot of people at our company before this, they worked in autonomous vehicles. That was like the key industry for a lot of deep learning workloads. Maybe a couple of years ago, before I think generative AI sort of kicked off. And I guess we saw this interesting trend when OpenAI came out with the TextGPT 3 models. When the model sort of launched in the middle of 2022, we fundamentally felt that a lot of deep learning workloads were going to change. I don't know if people remember how machine learning workloads looked back then. Probably a lot of people do. It's like everyone trained these very custom models, used to train like these BERT models to do these very, very specific tasks. And very quickly what happened was we saw the writing on the wall that these generic models were going to be able to solve extremely valuable tasks in society without having to do a lot of tuning. And in that world, we basically were like, okay, we're building these extremely bespoke pieces of infrastructure that let you run these complex architectures. If everyone is going to run the same type of architecture, why would we be an infrastructure company? Like, what would our differentiation be? And I think from there, we were just like, hey, the application layer is probably where we will be able to have the most differentiation down the line. So I think we just needed to make the pivot at that point.
Great. Yeah. So in that podcast I was referring to, right? It was one of the, I think the first, was that the first in-depth media exposure that you had? Yeah, it was about a month ago, right? It was
maybe a couple months ago.
A couple months ago. It was the Litecoin Y Combinator podcast, right? An interview where, and you said everyone is going to be a builder. If that's the future, right? Or if everyone's a builder, what concrete shifts in tooling, training, or governance must staff engineers and platform leads like those we have in the audience make so that this builder era scales instead of spirals?
Yeah, so I think there's maybe two, the reason why I say that is not that everyone is going to become a software developer like immediately, but one interesting stat is we have someone at our company on like our sales team that has actually built a variety of apps to actually replace sales tool spend. The reason why that's not super remarkable, at least like in the very short term, is it is awesome that he's able to build apps, but these are very much one-off apps. They're not deeply connected to all the data inside our business, and it's not connected to production critical data, right? So I think down the line, you have to imagine if you project this out forward that everyone at a company is going to be able to contribute technology in some way, right? The depth of the technology, it's unclear, like, whether or not a person that's non-technical is going to contribute technology that deeply affects production workloads. But I think the gap that's missing there is probably security, right? You don't want like a random system that you build going like destroying another service. So there's probably a lot of details to sort of figure out before you have, let's say, someone non-technical going and building a production critical application, right?
So legacy vendors like Salesforce will, bolt on AI. AI native platforms such as Windsurf and OpenAI are being built from scratch. What decision framework should a principal architect use to decide when to modernize the incumbent stack and when to carve out a greenfield AI native path, right? Can you give us maybe a green flag metric and a red flag metric?
Yeah, I think maybe like some things to maybe think about are, there's no fundamental reason why Salesforce cannot make their product much more AI native, right? Like I think people like to believe just because a bunch of startups are in a category, like a bunch of the big companies are going to die, but probably a bunch of the big companies are going to actually succeed in this space. I think the only reason why they don't succeed is they don't innovate fast enough, right? In our category, and the rate of pace of innovation is actually kind of remarkable, right? Just to give some numbers and put them into perspective, just on the hardware side, forget about even the speed at which the models are getting better. The NVIDIA GPUs in 2017 could do 10 teraflops of compute. By 2022, it was 700. So we're seeing like a rate of improvement of the hardware that's maybe twice as fast as Moore's law right now, going on under the hood. So basically, the biggest driver that would prevent a company like Salesforce to become more AI native is just they don't innovate fast enough, right? And they can't disrupt themselves fast enough. But ultimately, they have all the distribution. They should actually be well positioned to go out and capture the market.
Earlier this month, you shipped the Windsurf browser inside the IDE, right? So your Cascade agent, you call it, can edit, run, and test live UI code end to end. Which milestones must an agent hit before you'd ship to a regulated bank? And where do humans stay in the loop?
Yeah. So I think the reason why we shipped a browser, we're the only product that also has like a browser attached to our agent for like the code assistant market, is we just feel like in the future down the line, like if you want to build something that automates a lot of software engineering, it's going to need to look at your logs. It's going to need to look at like all the data that a software engineer actually looks at, right? If you actually look at what a software developer does, maybe only like 20 or 30% is actually writing software, right? Maybe the remaining 20 or 30% is reviewing code, testing code, debugging code, looking at traces, and so on and so forth, right? So you're going to imagine that to actually capture the tail of everything a developer does, these systems need access to a lot of different data sources, right? When it comes to some of these regulated industries, yeah, I think we take security really, really seriously at the company. We have a hybrid model for actually deploying our software for enterprises. So none of the personalized data actually ever gets persisted outside of the user's tenant. But yeah, it actually gets pretty wonky once you add a browser. To be very honest, like you can imagine the types of attacks that are possible where I don't know, like the AI goes and makes a request to some other website, but actually can exfiltrate like your entire code base, right? And these are things that we're working on inside the company to make sure that that is like not a real possibility.
Yeah, no, commend you for doing that. I don't see anyone else having done that the way you've implemented that in the browser. So that's really interesting. So you celebrate this idea of a 4-person team, right? Velocity. And that's the way to build. But yet you're saying Windsurf needs way more engineers, right? You're probably on the hiring path big time. So how do you scale headcount without recreating this big team drag that a lot of people are talking about right now? I think a lot of people in the audience can identify with. What's the takeaway for senior engineer managers who want both speed and governance?
Yeah. I think there's a little bit of this idealistic thought right now, which is that there's going to be like a 1-person company that's a $1 billion company, and I think that just like flies in the face of, I guess, the society we live in, which is like we live in a capitalist society, and if one person can make a $1 billion company, what prevents another person to immediately after that go and do the same thing and cut their margins and I guess destroy their business, right? Very little, right? So ultimately having more people, if you can have more people to grow faster and make a better product, you're gonna be much more successful than a person that just sticks on to having one person. So fewer people is not necessarily a sort of path to success. But I think the reason why fewer people usually is successful is that when you have fewer people, you just spend less time aligning a group of people, right? Like imagine having every time you want to prove out a new idea, you need to bring 30 people into a room and have all of them agree, right? In some sense, all of them are correct, right, when they come up with an idea, because no one has ever built anything for what they're trying to test, right? So it's very hard to get everyone to sort of get aligned. But I think in our category in general, since so much of it is changing so quickly, what we value the most is, are we testing enough hypotheses in parallel? And every hypothesis can't be tested by like 20 people. It's tested by a handful of people. And because the ceiling of what we can build and how much software can be improved is so high, We just believe there are lots of things that you can test. So we try to go with an approach of having very small teams that each try and test like a handful of hypotheses, right? And some of them will work. And if they do end up working, then we can actually rejigger the company to make sure that more people end up working on that initiative, right? But we'd like to almost think of our company as having like many different startups that are kind of testing many different hypotheses in parallel.
Right. So, so that was org design, right? You talked about setting these hypotheses. So we're moving into another question around kind of ROI. So let's move to how you measure, right? So if repetitive boilerplate code, drops to near zero, engineers get time back. How should product owners quantify the ROI of redeploying that talent to higher order experimentation, right? These other hypotheses, and what metrics have proven useful inside Windsurf?
Yeah, I think in general, like it really just comes down to what kind of company you have, right? Like there's a CIO that I met that was running a sort of a grocery sort of business, right? And it's not like a Safeway. It's a pretty brick and mortar grocery business, right? And for him, it was mostly like the ceiling for technology was quite low. Like once he hits the goal of what technology he has, he's happy, which just means that actually maybe he doesn't actually redeploy talent in that case. But on the other hand, some of our customers, companies like JP Morgan Chase, yeah, they have a lot of people, but the ceiling of the experience they can provide to their customer is very high, right? And I think what's going to happen in the next handful of years is the expectations from our customers are going to be higher on the experiences they deserve, right? With technology being so easy to sort of build, you have to imagine that our customers are going to expect every service they use to be much more personalized, to actually understand them a lot better, right? And I think it's incumbent on every company, almost because technology is so much easier to build now, to figure that out for themselves in whatever industry. Because if they don't, their competitors will, right? And I think for us, there are a handful of rough metrics that we've put into our product. We actually make it very easy and transparent to understand the value that you're getting from the product. We provide metrics like what percentage of the code is actually getting ultimately written. And companies can then tie that to their PR cycle time and a bunch of other metrics internally. But these are all like very rough metrics on productivity internally.
Great. You talked about the Morgan Stanley size company, but you actually have some of these customers now. Morgan Stanley, I believe, is one of them, right? So Windsurf now runs on 100 million line repos at JP Morgan, Chase, and other giants. Which single optimization delivered the biggest latency or cost to serve win at that scale? Like I don't know, heterogeneous hardware. I mean, you've been in the hardware business. I think that's probably one of your advantages. Custom runtimes, model distillation, caching.
Yeah.
Any thoughts there?
I think the biggest win is actually personalization. So actually deeply understanding the code base, right? Because I think what becomes really hard when a company has like 100 million lines of code is when you ask the agent to go ahead and do something, it's not only important that the agent does it correctly, because if it does it correctly by deleting all your code and rewriting it, it's not a very maintainable piece of code, right, in the end. So what we found is the most valuable is how do we deeply understand the intent of the users and people in the organization, and how do you deeply understand the code base to go and make fairly large-scale changes? I think that was the thing that provided us the massive amounts of wins to actually go out and work with the largest enterprises out there.
Great. So staying ahead of the foundation model curve, right? So every new foundation model closes some of the gap between the latest LLM technology and then these fully featured coding agents, right? We're going to be hearing from Andrew Ng later today, where he talked about, hey, you can have an inferior model, but pair it with agents, and you just got a much better system than even the most advanced models. But these more advanced models are now getting native tool use. So I think maybe 12 months from now, what is the innovation, right? What is the alpha that the Windsurf must have to stay indispensable, and how should this audience judge whether a vendor is actually moving that frontier?
Yeah, I think basically every time a new model or a paradigm comes out, you should expect maybe a brand new, almost disruptive way that the product fundamentally changes, right? With the advent of these agentic models, that was the only reason why Windsurf was actually capable of delivering these experiences where the AI could go out and make many changes out in parallel, right, on behalf of the user. And you can imagine every single step function improvement will have some large change that it will bring along. As the agents become much more robust and able to operate over a longer time horizon, Windsurf will be like a platform by which you manage many agents in parallel to go out and modify your code base and go and actually manage all your applications. And it's incumbent on us to constantly kind of disrupt ourselves ourselves there.
Great. I think Michael Corsi mentioned that we're taking questions through the Whova app that hopefully you've all downloaded. So I've already got a question that has come in, but we also have microphones here. So if you haven't had a chance to get that in recently, I might not have had a chance to look at it, but come to these microphones and maybe ask a question. We've got time for maybe one or two questions if that's okay. But that first question that came in is, how do you fend off competitors, like Cursor, Claude Code, OpenAI's Codex, Gemini has a coding agent, Microsoft. How do you stay in front of these?
Yeah, I think that at the highest level, like for us, what really matters the most, and I'd probably venture that most people here 10 months ago probably had never heard of us, despite the fact that at the time we were working with some fairly large enterprises. I think for us, what matters most is not who's heard of whom in the very short term. It's that, are we executing on the right strategy and doing it at a fast enough clip, right? In the end, and I think one of the hard parts in the space that makes it really hard to execute on a good strategy is it's very easy to go out and kind of chase hype like extremely quickly. Like in the beginning of last year, probably everything everyone was talking about was the Devon sort of launch video, right? And that still hasn't really come to fruition, which indicates that you kind of need to do a bit of both. You need to not be so incremental that you become irrelevant 6 or 9 months from now, right? You're so incremental that you kind of like miss the large step, but also B, don't project out so forward that you're irrelevant for too long, right? Yeah. So that's like a very hard thing to do. And I think just us executing very quickly on this is itself very challenging. So I think if we just go out and focus, we have a good shot, right? But what I'm more worried about is actually us not innovating fast enough. Right? That's like probably the biggest worry I have internally.
Yeah. Any questions from the audience? Feel free to come up, ask your questions. If you have anything, you have to come into these microphones. Okay, we got a gentleman coming up.
Hey, I'm not a developer, so this may be naive, but I've read
Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, Rick Sherlin from Sherland AI Software. We're a software M&A firm. The things I've read from comments from developers is that it's easy to do 90% of the work, but the other 10% takes another 90% effort. Can you kind of enlighten us on what the hard stuff is at the end and how you go about addressing those issues? And if I could add another, what about the Pegas and Appians that have long done low or no code? Can they adapt for this, or the things they do that are different, or do they get eclipsed by what you're doing?
Yeah. Okay, yeah, I'll try to take the first one. So developers do a lot of things, right? They write software, review software, test software, debug software, deploy software. There's like a gamut of things that they ultimately end up doing. And that's like the long tail. So if the AI, all it does is, let's say, writes code extremely quickly, you've just punted the problem to like reviewing a bunch of code, right? Which itself takes time, right? But you have to imagine down the line, AI will also get very good at reviewing software, testing software, deploying software. Like our product already helps developers now review code too. So it's almost like you're cutting wood, right? You have 100 units of time, maybe 20, 30 units of time are in a bunch of these segments, and you have to like chop enough wood. Because if you only chop wood from the 30 units of time, the 100 units still only become 70, if that makes sense. So that's why sort of even if you do a lot of automation on just one segment, it's not enough to basically automate the entire system there. To your Appian point, I guess there are lots of these companies like Retool, Appian, all these companies that kind of help you build apps. I think, yeah, their product categories are going to see a lot of disruption, but it's not necessary that they fail necessarily, right? They have a lot of data on how people have built apps on their platform already. They probably can actually help automatically build apps on their platform much better because of all the user data that they already have, right? So it just comes down to actually taking advantage of all the data that they have in their system and actually reskinning their product. It's a big initiative, right? It's not going to be a very easy problem, but it's not their game to lose also.
I'm so sorry, but we are out of time. So apologies, gentlemen. But hopefully we could get your questions answered later in the show. Thank you very much, Varun, for joining us. Good luck on everything. Very impressive.
Thanks a lot.